You're listening to the God Life Culture Podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome back to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we are so thankful and excited that you are tuned in for a brand new episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. We want to remind you to take this minute to hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening to us, whether it's Apple or Spotify. We would definitely appreciate that subscription. And also, if you have not left us that review and rating, be sure to do so. That definitely helps put our show in front of more people, and we would so appreciate it. Eddie, how are you doing today?
Today is a new day. It's a good day. I just, as always, whenever I get asked that question, for some reason, it's like, even if I had a bad day, that all goes out the window. And it's like, I'm doing great. I'm happy. My family's alive. Everybody's doing good. But obviously, you may have your run-ins throughout the day where work is driving you crazy because it's about to be 5 o'clock, but everyone decides that that's the moment where they need all their urgent things to be figured out and responded to. So you're trying to be polite and also looking at like, I'm about to clock out. That's too bad for you. But you also try to be responsible with that other stuff. But overall, I'm just doing great and super excited for the special guest that we have today. How are you doing?
Yeah, everything is great. And like you said, you have to make the best of everything. And there's always that hustle and that grind. But, I'm very happy to be here. And like you said, we have had, special guests kind of, since January, right? Yeah. And we've had a lot of special guests over these last few weeks in this summer. And, we're also grateful that you guys have enjoyed our last few episodes. We had a guest co-host, and then, me and you kind of did 2 episodes and had some topics to talk about. But today we have a very special guest with us that I know our listeners are going to enjoy, are going to just benefit from, and just be blessed by the conversation.
So with that being said, let's welcome to the God Life Culture Podcast, Pastor Ruthy Rodriguez. Ruthy, please say hello to our listeners.
What's going on, guys? Hey, God Life Culture Podcast. Eddie, Miguel, guys, thank you for having me. I'm amped up to be here.
Thank you for being here with us. And as always, we always have to ask this question. Sometimes our guests find it daunting, but we always like to ask this question as a way to introduce our special guest to our listeners, which is, Ruthy, who are you? If you had to describe and explain yourself to people who maybe are not familiar with you, how would you do that?
That is now I know why it's a daunting question. If you guys had a camera right here, you would see the shock and awe in my face right now. I'm like, all right, let's go. So if I had to describe myself, I think the first thing I would say is, it sounds so cliche, but I love God. That's the first thing, right?
Good.
But that talks about my relationship with God, but doesn't really explain who I am. So what does that love, how do I translate or communicate that love to God? And really it's through arts. I just love music. Been playing music since I was a kid, musician, and went to school for it. Had some interesting stories with that. Was able to do some traveling musically. Currently I am pastoring and still super passionate about music. Got a little bit of video editing that I do. I'm a fake graphic designer. Canva makes me legit. And so really that's my thing. I'm an aunt, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. And like I said, I'm currently pastoring, associate pastor of a church in Jersey City, the Tabernacle. And I think in a nutshell, it's music, it's God, it's ministry, all of that wrapped into one.
Yeah, I think you answered that question perfectly. And now when you say, you're a musician and into the arts and all of these things, when you think back on your journey, right, I think we all have a genesis. We all have a beginning when it comes to the things that we're passionate about or the things that we love. When you think back on your journey as a musician, as a worshiper, as someone who's interested in the arts, what experience jumps out at you marking who you are today?
The biggest one immediately is I can remember seeing myself as a kid. My church was a church in Newark, New Jersey. It was called Sinai, beautiful church on Park Avenue. And I remember being there Sunday after Sunday. I don't know how young I was, but completely focused on the musician section of the church. So like I don't remember sermons, I don't remember the singers. I only remember the musicians, where they were seated, what it looked like, what it felt like to be in a service, and hearing the energy of the music. And then hearing stories from my mom saying that I would cry, like being 3, 4, even as young as 2, crying because I couldn't run to the drum set. And so, or, as I got older, playing tambourine in the service and feeling like I was like going to go on tour with like Marcos Witt, because I was like, my skills on the tambourine were at a whole other level. So like, if you were to say a genesis, I would have to say it was music in church. And then it continued with my mom. My mom was actually an organist for 10 years. She took classes. And she was the first one to teach me scales and chords. And that was really the start, was in church and in my house.
Now, there's this video of you that's going around. You did an interview recently.
Yeah.
And in that video, you had a statement, which is, if God places you in a room, you've got something to contribute.
Absolutely.
And I actually watched the full interview and was surprised, but I'm like, why are you surprised? Because, I've known you for many years. I've seen you, minister, at your local church to very big venues and stadiums. And as you were sharing this moment and this testimony, and this word of encouragement, you spoke about, not feeling comfortable in the rooms that God had placed you in. And I'm like, Ruthy, feeling like that. Like, I'm like, she's a beast. She's crazy. She's so anointed, but in reality, because of our humanity and other things, we do find ourselves feeling that way. So for our listeners that have not gotten the opportunity, to hear that, can you elaborate a little bit more on that if God places you in a room, you've got something to contribute?
Absolutely. Like the story that I gave for that experience had everything to do with an event that I played at a few years ago. And I had the opportunity to sit in with a band that I felt was out of my league. It was supposed to be a band that I put together for an event, and I connected with another friend of mine who is a giant in the industry. And he decides he's going to get like the hottest players he can get at the time. And I really felt like a small fish in a humongous pond. And what's interesting about it, guys, is that you never see yourself the way people see you. And we know that, and we could preach that, and we could teach that. And even if you're not a Christian, you know that. You never, ever see yourself the way people see you. And they'll be like, well, but you're a beast. You got this. But a lot of times we don't feel that way. Yeah. And we feel so insignificant. And at that moment, that's how I felt. And the story that I shared for those that hadn't heard the interview was, there were this amazing drummer by the name of Noah Smith. The bassist was Danny Hernandez. He traveled and toured with many Christian artists. Then you have Benny Martinez, amazing guitarist living out in Nashville, who plays for everyone. And Randall Johnson, awesome organist from William McDowell's church. And they started like shedding at the end of the service. And for those that don't know shedding, you just start like playing like spontaneously, and you're just grooving as a band. And I was having a good time. And all of a sudden they're handing out solos. And I'm like, no, oh my God, I don't solo. I really don't solo. And I had two decisions at that moment: to do what I usually have done, which is to shy away and then go in a corner and cry and be a quote unquote girl about it, and I know that could be rather offensive in our day and age, but that's how I felt. Or I could step up to the plate with what I have. And what I have is chords. And I can play chords, and I can play changes that you'll throw the changes, people go, woo, So I took advantage of that moment and said, you know what, I'm just going to come to the plate with what I got. And that was such a lesson for me, guys, back then. And can I tell you, since that interview, I've gotten the testimonies, but even in my own life, I got to give what I got.
Yeah.
And that's enough. Now, don't get me wrong. We don't want to get lazy with our giftings. You should get better. You should look for improvement, whatever the case may be, whether it's business, whether it's ministry, whatever the case is. But when I'm constantly shying away from opportunities, when I'm constantly looking down at myself, when I'm constantly questioning what I have, when I'm constantly sitting in the corner crying about opportunities, what you're not realizing is that there are doors that God has opened that because of your whining and complaining and self-doubt and insecurity, you've closed for yourself. At that point, it's no one else's fault but your own. And that's something that ministered to me big time. And it's been like this thing. It's been this theme that I've just been able to share with a few people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. And what I love about it is the fact that, you're talking from a musician's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a principle that can be applied whether you're a musician, a worshiper, a teacher, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, right? Like, regardless of
Yeah.
what field and what you do in ministry, in your career, within your local church, I think we all face those moments where we are intimidated by,
Yeah.
those people who we may even look up to, right? Or, want to emulate or have been inspired by. Then we're in the same room as them and we're like, oh my goodness, do I have what it takes, right? Do I have what it takes to
Mm-hmm.
do this? And, I heard this statement one time that someone said, never shrink because there is greatness in a room.
Oof.
And I think it's so easy sometimes to think less of ourselves. It's so easy to be intimidated and in turn miss out on opportunities
Mm-hmm.
because of that, and it's like you just never know, who was in the room and who was watching and who was there and who needed the unique gift that you had, right? And that only you
Absolutely.
can offer in that moment. So I love that because, again, it can apply to literally everything and anything you do, both for the Lord and in your life in general,
Listen, and I don't mean to jump in on
No, go
that, but
ahead.
what you said was so amazing because when that video came out and we released that little snippet, I literally had people from all arenas of life. And one of the ones that mostly impacted me was someone that wrote to me who is in the field of insurance, which that's not what the interview was for.
Right.
But he was like, when I heard that snippet, it happened to me that day where I was in a room with people that I felt I didn't have anything to contribute. I didn't. And he's like, I felt like in a corner, I felt like hiding, and hearing your interview motivated me so that the next time I'm in that space, which I will be, I know how to tackle the situation. So you're right. It crosses boundaries because I think we've all been in that place where we feel like, why am I even here? Why am I here? And the message is give what you have. Be confident giving it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And, one thing on this podcast that we talk about often is the idea that, young ministers and people who are out there, young preachers, singers, musicians need mentors in their lives. That is
Mm-hmm.
something that, we are both very passionate about being, the fact that we have grown up in the church since very young and have been involved in ministry since very young. We have seen the importance of having people in your life that can speak over you, that can help you, that can help guide you and help make decisions and even warn you about certain things or, correct you on certain things if necessary. So I want to ask you, how important do you think it is for in this conversation for young musicians and worship leaders to have people in their life that is able, again, to guide them, to warn them, to even just prep them for certain things if they see that something they're doing something that may not be in good taste or could have been better, to have that voice to help direct them. How important do you think that is?
Guys, I'm literally shaking my head right now, about to take a shoe and throw it out the door. Because this is like, I'm sitting here going, are they in my brain? Because as we were talking before, I thought about my mentors. And I thought about the fact that, and I've been, and esto un paréntesis, just in between, um, doing that interview, the first interview, was something that I needed to do, and I didn't realize it. And it was part of a process of healing that I've needed to do. I talk about a gap in my musical journey. There is a gap of silence because of my own insecurities and my own issues. Now, um, that that music insecurity crossed into ministry. So when God called me to be a pastor and I finally accepted the calling, I was dealing with the same questions. No, this is too much. I can't do it. Doing all of that. And then instead of measuring myself to ministries that I could learn from at my level, I was measuring myself against churches that are like 50 times larger than me. And so those feelings of insecurities were growing. So I could find myself, guys, moments where I'd be like in a corner in my house, just really like, I can't do this. This is too much. I can't do it. I can't do it. And so then I had these mentors that God had assigned to me. And in precise moments in my life, I would get phone calls from them, literally like they had a clock on me or something. And they'd call me. And every message consistently was, put your pants on and stop crying.
Hmm.
Now, that was harsh. And I remember one day in particular, God has assigned me a spiritual mother. She's a prophet. And there were many instances where I would be having a quiet moment where no one could see me, just literally saying, I can't do this. Just like I bombed musically, look at the opportunity I lost out because of I can't do it. Now with the church, I can't do it. I can't do it. Oh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. And she ends up calling me. I'm thinking she's going to give me a prophetic word, say, you can do it, my daughter. Be lifted up, daughter of mine. I see you from afar. And instead, she calls me, and in Spanish, she says, deja el mamitis, which is like, stop being a baby cry.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be honest. I was in my feelings. I was livid. I said, how dare you? Like in my head, I'm like, how dare you? And what I realized is that every mentor that I had for at least a year was being iron that sharpens iron. And the thing that people forget is that when iron sharpens iron, guys, it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not willing to hear those voices, you're not going to grow. And so the idea of having a mentor is not so that they can applaud you every single time. Oh, like it's like when you have like my niece. My niece will sit there and do a circle that makes no kind of sense. Oh, good job, sweetie. Good job. At a certain time, at a certain point of our lives, you need the mentors to say, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That I get your vision, but you're not going in the right direction. Or this, you've got to stop the whining, or you're being too puffed up. Or I think you need to sit it out. This is a season to sit out. Or if you're a vocalist, you're doing too many runs in the service. Or if you're a musician, that was nice, but you weren't sensing the atmosphere. And you have to be sensitive to that. And when you're not, and you're a renegade and you want to go rogue, it might look cute at the moment, but you end up paying for that in the long run.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's important.
No, go ahead,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
No, it's just crucial. I think mentors are crucial, guys. I mean, for me, it's been a lifesaver. It really has been.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that Miguel and I talk a lot about also is that kind of unfortunately, especially in the Latin community, we see a lot, or at least back in the day, us growing up, we see a lot how a young person would be talented, or a young person would be anointed, or a young person would have a gift, and it was kind of like being thrown into the wolves. Okay, yeah,
Right.
Go do 37 concerts. So yeah, go lead this group, go lead this ministry and stuff. And a lot of times there was that emptiness, that lack of mentorship, where people did make the mistakes and people did had to do trial and error, and it maybe caused a lot more headaches than could have been avoided if mentors would have either made themselves present or would have been found to really guide those individuals, and to help them. Because it's like you said, it's not always about, hey, you're doing a good job, here's a pep talk. Sometimes you really do have to give the constructive criticism, the hard truths on how to, redirect certain things and how to fix certain things. Because like you said, it may be looking cute at the moment, but in reality it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think it is really important, that idea that, as churches, that if you don't have that program in for mentorship, that you really look into adopting that, so that, these youngins, or even us, older folk, can really take appreciation. Well, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you in that category on
No,
your
I'm talking
birthday.
about you guys. Yes, sir.
She's like, you ain't talking about me.
But yes, I do. I think it's so vital and so important, because I reflect
Yeah.
back on my life and see of moments where I could have really used one and I didn't, but because of God's grace and mercy, and because He is awesome that way, I may not have it physically, but He was there to guide me in those moments. Something that I always love to speak about, and I love to hear other people's experiences, whether specifically with you as a musician, pastor, just a person that just been in church their whole life, is when you bear witness to how God, either through music or through a moment where He just, showed off, liberated or healed or restored someone's life. So what is a moment that you can talk about where you encountered God in such a way, whether it was musically or whether it's just at a random moment, where you experienced God as either your liberator, your healer, your restorer?
I think for me there's always a few experiences like that. And as particularly as an artist, because artistry really is an extension of who you are and of your worship, you know. So I can remember one time, particularly when I was writing. I was doing a writing session with my best friend, who at the time we were business partners in a company called 2911 Music. And so we were
Yes.
doing like a songwriting camp where we were just writing, just pounding out songs. And I remember that one day, this melody just came to me. The music, the
Mm-hmm.
music came to me. But the lyrics actually came to me one day when I was feeling so low. And this was years ago. I mean, I was feeling really low, overwhelmed with school at the time. I was doing my bachelor's, overwhelmed with church and ministry and a bunch of stuff. And when the lyrics came out, I wrote them down. And I remember that when we went into the lab and I started to record the song just as a demo, I couldn't get through the song.
Hmm.
For as much as I tried, I couldn't get through the song. And when I finally was able to track the song, the original version, you could hear my voice cracking. You could hear you could hear the weight of the song. And it turned out to be a song that we added on what ended up being the project of a band that I was in, that we formed. It was called True Destiny. It
Mm-hmm.
was the last song on the album. And the song, if I remember correct, the lyrics were in Spanish. Uh, Gosh, I don't even remember the lyrics. But if I remember, I would bring it up. But it was one of those songs where it broke me in a way that allowed me to do healing, because I was able to pray to God from that place of brokenness. And I sensed my own deliverance through a song that God gave me to sing. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people can relate to that, where maybe you're writing or you're playing, and you could sense your own deliverance happening in that place of worship, whether it's your bedroom, whether it's a service. And I think that that's amazing when the artistry that God gave you can minister to you. Because guys, we all know, like, what can we give if we're not set free ourselves? We're going to give of what we have. And if you're broken and it's not dealt with, if you're hurting and it's not dealt with, then for as much as we can preach and say what we want, we don't give what we say, we give who we are. That's something I heard Michael Brunet say, which it completely undid me. It's not about what we say, it's about who we are. So what am I giving out? So if I can have my music heal me so that then I can heal others, that's powerful. So that was one of those moments where I feel like I was set free in that moment of worship in a song
Yeah.
that God gave me.
Yeah, and again, I think, behind every songwriter's song, and musicians, song and production and all of these things, there's always that story, right? There's
Yeah.
always that moment of, intimacy with Christ, or a situation that you have gone through. And oftentimes, again, it's your obedience in that moment. I said one time, a few episodes ago, that, creatives are oftentimes, some of the boldest people, because it is easier to put your feelings or emotions into a song or
Right.
into what you're doing than it is to maybe sit down face to face with someone and just speak about it, right? So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes you rather write poetry or write a song, or put an instrumental together, as opposed to really just being vulnerable in that way. And
Absolutely.
again, I think there is a reward for that obedience in being able to take that pain, or take that frustration, take that experience, and put it into that art form. And I think not, everyone's story is always so different, where for someone, they may just put out that song or put out, that production, and feel that healing and deliverance instantly in that moment. And then for others, it's almost like healing becomes this process where it's
Mm-hmm.
not a moment, where instead it's a series of obedient steps that one needs to take, and moments where it's like God, pushes you in this direction to do this and do the other thing.
Mm.
And again, I think, for our listeners and those listening, taking this as that, just that reminder that God can use us even in that moment and in that pain. And, whether it is to move us to write that
Mm-hmm.
song, or work as part of a team, with someone else and in collaboration. I think it's just awesome to be
Yeah.
able to do those things, and you're someone who has worked with many people and has collaborated with many people.
Yeah,
And
I've been lucky to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, you have, I mean, I know you have a long list, which I would love for you to share some of the people you have worked with. But if out of that list that you have, right, and the memories and the people that are coming to you at this moment, who is someone that you have worked with that impacted you greatly, and what is something that you learned from them?
Ooh, God life. Y'all coming with those questions. My God. Yes, good stuff. Immediately, out of all the artists that I've worked with, Ingrid Rosario. So, the thing with Ingrid, the first thing that impacted me about her was when the first time I met her, and it was gosh, I don't remember how many years ago. When I met her, because I knew her music, when she walked into the space, I was starstruck, and I was kind of being, I was trying not to, but I was being a fan, and like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I was doing all of that, and so we just connected immediately. And so when the event was over, it was like a weekend event. She ends up, I say, yeah, hey, can you sign my CD? And she's like, sure. And so she signs the CD and she puts her phone number. And so when I open it and I go, what? Hi. So I started like having this attack because I had her number. And when she caught on to the fact that I was kind of had like a fan moment, the first thing she said to me, she goes, I'm looking for friends, not fans.
Mm.
And that was like, me tiraron agua fría. Like they just poured a bucket of cold water on me. And it impacted me to see the artists and to see people that they are in the limelight and to understand that they're real.
Yeah.
And they're looking for real relationships. They're looking for people that are disinterested in them and just want them, not what they can offer.
Yes.
So fast forward a few years, or many years actually, January 2021, I hosted in my church a series called Blessed to Bless. God blesses us so we can bless others. And in that series that I brought on Sundays, on Fridays, every Friday, I brought a special guest to the church. And so one of the people I brought was Ingrid. And the whole thing that she brought in, because again, we've built this relationship and she's so personable. So when she came in, what wrecked my congregation was the fact that when she spoke, somebody asked her, what's the thing that you love most about ministry? And if you could do any other ministry, what would it be? And do you know what she said?
What?
She said, an usher, a door greeter. And when I tell you, you can see the faces drop on that Zoom session. And she goes, do you know why? She goes, because the greeter is the first person you see when you walk into a building. And that smile can change your life.
Yes.
Man, and that wrecked me. And I say it wrecked me. I don't mean like I was sitting there crying broken. I mean like all of a sudden there's a paradigm shift. And I was like, what's important? And I think that that's one thing I learned with her. And I've seen consistently in her ministry and our relationship is the humility. She could be on an altar ministering to 20 people. She can be in an audience or a stadium ministering to 80,000 people. And when she comes off that altar, if she hasn't served and worshiped God and ministered to his people and walk off and let her smile minister to you, she hasn't done what she's been called to do. So I'm able to look at artists from that perspective. Like, yeah, awesome what you've reached. It's fantastic what you've been able to do. But when I can see their heart, their service to the house, when I can see them just trying to be real, it puts into perspective what matters.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where, like, Lord, allow me to model that really. And that's how Jesus lived his life. And so when I see it manifested in people that have had notoriety and have had a certain amount of fame and they could still be like that, that's priceless. Priceless.
No, absolutely. And Ingrid is someone who many of our guests have spoken about and spoken so fondly about. And she's also someone who's been in the game for a minute as well, which is why we see, how she's impacted so many people. And to see someone who has that, if you want to call it fame or that reach, be so humble as well, and to understand the importance of the things that really do matter, especially in a church setting, that is impactful and is like grounding, calmate to the other people that are like in this cloud nine. It like brings them back down to reality of, okay, no, these are the things that really do matter, and that you can actually practically do right now. Like, you may not be where Ingrid is at the moment, but these are things that you can actually do at the moment that will have as much as an impact as of whenever God levels you up to wherever your journey is going to take you. And I said this before, kind of playing around, but I do think us are, like, we're kind of the the generation or the people that are kind of in the middle. So like we've experienced the old school. We're very familiar with the good and the bad and all the good stuff with that. But we're also very present in what's happening now in the church culture, whether it's musically or within the church. And, you know, you have that whole new school vibe that's, you know, rising up. But being people that have experienced the old school, are really involved presently in the new school, you know, what is something from old school, like old school music or worship, that you do not want the new schoolers to forget?
The spontaneity. Yeah, the spontaneity. The
Elaborate.
freedom.
Yeah.
It's that. I think there's a certain level of freedom that I don't want to say they've lost it, because I really, listen, I cannot stomach that narrative where, you know, we start doing the whole, this new generation has completely missed the mark. No, they haven't. Like, stop it.
Yes.
Stop it. You know, the reality is that we all work under one purpose, which is the kingdom purpose. And in that kingdom purpose, we each have an assignment. My assignment is not going to look like your assignment. The last generation's assignment doesn't look like the present generation's assignment, but we can each learn from each other.
Yes.
So I think the spontaneity, I think that in being so structured in our services, and listen, in my church, you know, my parents, my dad's going to be like 73 in the summer. My mom's in her 60s, and these guys are more forward thinkers than even me. Like we just got an LED wall, not because I pushed the LED wall, but because they pushed the LED wall. Queremos tecnología, you know. So they're those people. So I understand the structure. I understand the 4 songs or the 3 songs, and if you can afford to see, you know, the multi-track, I get it. But I don't think I ever want to lose the idea that we can step away from a song and have a moment and not have production panic because now worship is moved past 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Or I have preachers that I absolutely follow. I have there's 2 preachers. One of them is Pastor Yesenia in the Dominican Republic, right? Love her. There's another pastor that I follow that I think he's amazing. But what I'm finding is that they've limited the preaching down to a 25-minute segment. And every week, y'all, I walk away going, you wanted to say more.
Yes. Yep.
You wanted to say more. Now, listen, I get it. We have time constraints. I also get it that with campuses, there's different things. But there has to be room for us to go, you know what? Let's break loose. Let's break loose, especially Hispanics. You know how we are. You know, like we're so expressive. Yes. And so I think that's fine. The ability for the band to open up and flow, the ability for singers to open up and flow. Dale, you know? So I think that's a big one for me, the spontaneity.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well, because I feel like, you know, hay que darle libertad al Espíritu Santo. And when when you're like, oh no, it's a 15-minute session and the time is up, but the atmosphere is, you can feel that something's about to break or something's about to lose or God is about to pour out something, you know, how dare you cut it? Like, how dare you be like, oh no, our 15 minutes is up, you know, I just got to go sit down, you know? So that is something that you definitely have to have your pulse on, and be very sensitive to the Spirit, because you do not want to cut out somebody's blessing because you're so constricted to, you know, these time frame and parameters.
Yeah. And, you know, if you don't mind me jumping on that real quick, it's funny because I would argue, like, I would so agree with that. And I think that as a church, we have this concept that, and I've told this to my worship leaders, God is not in a box. Our church was the complete opposite for a long time. They felt like if the worship experience only lasted 30 minutes, that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough time for God to work. And I'm like, since when is God in a box? Like God, the moment I say, you know, like welcome this morning, the work of God could be happening at that moment, because it's not about, let's be honest, this is not about waiting on God. God is present. God is always with us. He will never forsake us. God is always there. What are we waiting for then? It's the people's hearts to open.
Yes.
So I think that time that you were just talking about, like being sensitive to the atmosphere, is because there are people who are sitting there that are still soaking in the song. They're still understanding the lyrics. There's a tear flowing, but they don't want anybody to see them. They're feeling like a little jitter and they're not sure what's going on. Sometimes you have to be sensitive to the fact that finally there's a breakthrough. There is a moment. And then there's the other side of the equation. Do I want every service? to have an hour-long worship set? Probably not. You know what I mean? Sometimes we're singing and like you could sense that it was time to go like 3 hours ago.
Very true.
So yeah, I think it's a sensitivity. I think structure is fantastic. I think where we're at now is great. I love it. I love Pro Presenter. I love amazing worship experiences with the lights, and I love all that stuff. But if we can combine that sensitivity to what God wants to do at that moment with those hearts, I'd say we're winning. We're
Yeah.
winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, something you said earlier, speaking, about a personal experience that you were saying, you had mentioned something about how oftentimes it's easy to compare ourselves to other people who are maybe in a higher level than we are, right? So for instance,
Yes.
worship leaders, in their local churches may be super mega fans of Maverick City or of an Elevation Worship or of a Transformation Church, right? These churches that are,
Hmm.
on levels that obviously some of our local churches are just not there yet. They may not have some
Hmm.
of the resources or the equipment or the technology and, just all of those things that make up, the journey that those churches and groups have had. And I think oftentimes, whether it is young people in ministry, in our churches, in our local churches, where we may compare what we do or how we do things to those other churches or groups,
Hmm.
and right now Maverick City is kind of like at the top of the game right now and has a lot of people's attention, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And there are a lot of eyes on them and a lot of people who love that style of worship and all of those things, who may then take that and compare it to their local church worship team,
Right.
and then get frustrated or grow,
Mm.
stressed and all of these things because it doesn't match, that level. So what do you say? How do we create this balance, this healthy balance where we are inspired by these people and by these groups and churches, whether it's in worship or just in, the preaching and what they do in their churches, but at the same time, don't grow stagnant or complacent where we are, where it's like, what, we can grow, we can move, we can, find more resources and grow in our gifts and invest in our gifts, but at the same time, simply be inspired and not imitate. What does that
Mm.
balance look like?
That's tough. That's tough because I think we all do that to a certain extent, right? So one of the things with me, with when I share at my church or when I speak to in whatever capacity, I am transparent, maybe sometimes to a fault, because I feel like I can't speak to a thing if I don't share my experience. So my challenge had been, and it's something that I'm very cognizant about. I'm very, very aware of it now. I'm very intentional to be careful with that, is that in watching all the big churches, specifically, like you mentioned, like the Potter's House, the Transformation Churches, Elevation, Redemption, right? I'm watching those churches, and then subconsciously, I'm coming into my worship experience frustrated with absolutely everything.
you you can say that again.
Frustrated with absolutely everything, and completely, and not sensing that it's affecting my own service to my house, and it's affecting the way I'm working with my leadership. And this just happened to me recently. I mean, as recently as the beginning of this year, because I would see, well, why can't we have lower thirds on our transmissions? Well, why is our transmission always crashing? I don't see elevations crashing. Well, why is the worship sound the way it does when we go online? It sounds fire in the building, but then when I listen to the live stream, it's like, yeah, don't air that. Well, why doesn't transformation sound like that? And so what it ends up doing is, one, you serve from a place of frustration, number one. And you're serving from a place of from frustration because you've placed unrealistic expectations on the resources that you currently have.
Hmm.
If I really go into these churches and what they make look so easy, there are $1 million budgets behind these things. And so when one day I said, I don't like the way I'm talking to my immediate staff. I wasn't being like a jerk or anything, but I was kind of like, guys, what's up with the visuals? It's not up to par. Oh, the music. I finally realized the problem is that I'm comparing to the wrong thing. I should use them for inspiration. But if I'm looking to learn for something immediate, I have to find something that is parallel to what I'm doing. And so I started to look at churches that are attendance wise are where we're at. In terms of what we're trying to do is where we're at, to see where we can improve or maybe even where we can be a blessing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, when I look back at my church, I remember one day I was looking back and I was talking to one of my leaders, and one of my young leaders, I said, God, I really love our church. Now, it wasn't because I was looking at somebody else and going, wow, what they're doing is terrible. But I understood that if I'm matching it to a church that has 37,000 members and my church only has 70, I'm creating space for that frustration because I've placed unrealistic expectations with what I have. So I think that as a ministry, you should look at them for inspiration. You should take time out and listen to Maverick. You should take time and listen to Elevations team, and even Transformations team, which is coming up ridiculous right now. You should look at them for inspiration, but understand that you have a set of resources. You don't have all those amazing vocalists. Most of those vocalists are traveling and they're professionals. So tú tienes que trabajar con lo que tú tienes. You have to work with what you have and then build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a definite, nugget that a lot of people, especially I feel like a lot of people who have been in their church for a really long time, need to receive and let it simmer, let it marinate. And
yes.
and understand that, because it is frustrating when your focus, what really happens is that your shift changes. Instead of it being like, how can we serve to our excellence here with what we have, it winds up being that whole comparison thing of, oh, but they're doing this, they're doing that, the way that you were expressing. But when you really like refocus and like, all right, Lord, how does giving 100% here look, and how can we reach that? That's the real goal. How can we reach giving 100% with what we have and not in comparison to what other people have?
That was so good, Eddie. That was so good when you said, what does 100% look like for us?
Yes.
What does excellence? Oh, we have to work in excellence.
Mm-hmm.
We have to. And so when we're saying that, what we're saying is we need to look like Transformation. No. What does excellence look like? In my case, for the Tabernacle in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And what we've learned to do is, yes, we'll look at, for instance, I'll give you an example. We were looking at the Elevation live stream to see how their moderators, online moderators, interact with their audience. And so what we did is that my team said, okay, they do this and they'll put the song title in the chat. I can't run my chat the way Elevation does. It's not as professional. It's not $1 million budgets. But we can take an element that inspires us that they're doing and implement it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And right there, your level of excellence just went up another level.
Yeah.
Now, can I make a parenthesis?
Yeah, definitely.
There has to be hunger. There's not now. Yes. There's time where there are people that are hungry and they're not getting it, guys. Well, let's do some real talk.
Mm-hmm.
Your ministry stuck. Your business is stuck. Whatever it is that you're moving is stuck. And it's at those moments where you need to go into prayer. Father, what's next? How can I be an answer? Or is this a conversation about a seasonal shift? So I think you have to be sensitive to the voice of the Lord to say, stay here, work it out. You have something to contribute. Or is this something where it's time to move? I don't know, guys. I don't know. I'm not telling anybody to leave their church. And if y'all leave their church, don't blame me. or let me steal this joke. If you want to email me at miguel@godlifepodcast.com. It's just to be sensitive. Stay hungry. Yes. Look for that level of excellence. But what does 100% look like for you?
No, absolutely. And I have a question that I only feel comfortable posing to you because it can be a controversial question that I've seen many people debate on online. But I always see that the loudest people are those that aren't even in the business. Like, they're not musicians. They're not, someone who is looking to support themselves through the gifts that God has given them and all that other stuff, but they have a very strong opinion on it. And you being someone who is in the music industry, connected to people from the music industry, and also is well connected to people within the church in ministry that are musicians, I really, I apologize if you feel like I'm putting you on the spot with this question, but I do think you have some insight on this question. So the question is, what is your opinion on musicians that have the duality of playing in church through ministry, but also play for secular artists?
Ay, mi madre, espérate. Ay, ay, ay. Wait, I think they're calling me. I think I gotta go. What do I think about that? It's so funny. Um, I'm going to give you my 100% answer.
Yes.
Honest.
Yes.
My honest answer is that we forget that for many musicians, professional musicians,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a weekend thing.
Yes.
This is their profession. This is what they went to school for. This is what they invested in. This is all the thousands of dollars on gear. This is what they've invested in. This is their gift. It's like a banker. It's like a nurse. This is their profession. And I would argue that I would be okay with a musician who plays in the house and plays secularly. Now, is there a line drawn? And I would argue yes. I think I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there, and I don't know who's going to hear this, but I'm going to go there. It's the same argument with listening to secular music. It's the same argument.
Yep.
I've had people ask me, Pastora, but you listen to secular music. And the answer is correct. I do. But do I listen to all secular music? The answer is no. Why? Because I also listen for lyrics and content. And if there's something that I'm like, oh man, this just doesn't feel right, then I'll turn it off, period. And I think I would argue the same thing for musicians. I think that if you're on a gig where it is just, you don't need a prophet to tell you, it's too much. That is too much. Then at that point, I would say, I would counsel the artist, like, have you looked at the fact that when you go to these events, this is what you're seeing, this is what it's promoting. You're going to these events and you're seeing, stuff that are really, really, what's the word? Entristeciendo el Espíritu Santo in you. And I think that that's where you need to go. Listen, I had a friend who was a professional Christian musician who was traveling many years ago with a very famous boy band. And in their tours, he would minister privately to these artists.
Wow.
So I think it's a tricky conversation. I think that it is a decision that people have to make, and it's a conversation of conviction, and I just shared mine in terms of secular music. Yeah. I think that we have to understand that it's a conversation of conviction. That's one. And two, if it's a professional musician, if you're not willing to let them travel on a positive secular artist's tour, then as a church, you need to be ready to compensate them what they're worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think conversations like this should move even our churches, right? To have, these conversations in reference to, like you said, the compensation of musicians, especially when there are harsh expectations or, rigid schedules involved in all of these things, and, that interfere kind of, right? When Sure. This craft or this, you as a musician is something that you both do as a career, right? And in ministry. Right? Because Sure. I think that's the whole other aspect where, like you said, for these individuals, a lot of times this is their career, yeah. Right? And, and then they also, use these gifts within our churches. But like you said, I like how you worded it, where it really has to come if the minute and the instance you feel that discomfort and you feel like this ain't it, you have to listen to that. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? And again, that can go for anything. The minute that, whatever we're doing and whoever we're serving and whatever is happening, the minute we sense that, okay, that something doesn't seem right or something seems off or this isn't, I don't feel super comfortable here, it's good to question that and listen to that voice, right? And that feeling. And when you have that relationship with God, right? That's that foundation, then you know what, Lord, like, lead me. Like, is this what you want me to do? Is this where you want me to step? Is this how you want me to use my gift?
Yes.
Because then we have those individuals who aren't doing, or collaborating, let's say, with the secular artists, but they're in disobedience because they're using their gifts in places that God hasn't called them to.
There it is. There it is.
So then it's like, is there a difference in that situation? Right?
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I agree. No, I agree with that. And I think that it's a knife that cuts both ways. I think that we have made the mistake to make the distinction that every Christian venue, every Christian event, every Christian invitation is of God.
Mm-hmm.
And the same God that will speak to you about an event or a gig or an opportunity that you took that is really saddening his spirit is the same God that will speak to you about being in a church or an event that, even though it has a title of Christian, is not what he wants you to be at. Listen, one time I was called to play for an event, and with pay and everything. And we did the sound check. Everything was great. At least the sound check, I would think it was like 2 days before. They did an earlier sound check, and then they did a sound check again because it was of the venue. And when we were in the green room, that artist, Christian artist, could not, for the life of him, stop using the F word.
Really?
And it was constantly like he would say it and then excuse himself, and then say it and excuse himself. And then when he wasn't cussing, him and his crew were consistently like dogging out other artists. And it was just, the vibe was so horrible. Like, I wouldn't want to be a part of that. So long story short, because I was playing auxiliary keys, meaning I wasn't playing the main keyboard part, I just couldn't. I just felt so uncomfortable in my heart about it. I was like, I just don't want to be associated with this. And so I did something that eventually ended up closing the doors for me in these opportunities. And I said, I won't be able to do the event. I can't do it. No, I can't. And I did. I walked away. I walked away from it. So I don't necessarily think it's a conversation about Christian, not Christian. I think it's about listening to the voice of God and being sensitive enough to say, this works for this. Listen, it's the same thing like when people want to get married with somebody in the church. Well, since they're Christian, it's God's automatic yes. Well, not always.
Yep.
So I think it's just being sensitive. Let's go back to the mentor conversation. Who are your mentors that are teaching you how to have an ear open to the Holy Spirit?
Yes.
It's not just about which chords to play, what cuts to do, and what musicians to listen to. It's about having private time with the Holy Ghost, intimacy with the Lord, to understand when he wants you to move and when he doesn't, what doors to walk through, what doors to close, and trusting him enough that he's got you. You know what I mean? And he's going to take you to where you need to go.
Yeah, and I think, all of that is great. And I also think that one of the things that we need to stop doing a lot of times is holding people to the standard or to the parameters in which God wants you to live by, because it sounds a little controversial, but I'm someone from the belief that, there's certain things that God may not want me to be a part of. There's certain things that God may want me to stay away from or whatever, because it's for my benefit, but that doesn't affect someone else negatively. So, God may not want me to be watching, TV shows or certain things like that. May want me to disconnect from social media, but it is not my job to then judge everyone that is connected to social media, because that's not for them. For me, it's one thing. For them, it's something else. And that's why the sensitivity to, the Holy Spirit and the voice of God is so important, because it also saves us from judging others, which is a sin within itself. So you're over here criticando al hermano because of whatever they're doing. Like you're falling in sin yourself for being judgmental and for being that way, So it is a topic of conversation that can go on for a really long time and has so many layers to it that is important to have, and sometimes I do, I see these conversations sometimes happening online, and it saddens me, because I'm like, you could be doing this the right way, but it just goes left because of the keyboard warriors and all those people, so when we have a conversation like this, and I'm very appreciative of your opinion and your feeling and your view on it, because it's definitely valid.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about it, because I think if there's anything that anyone's going to walk away from this conversation with of what I feel has been a fantastic convo, I feel really edified by this conversation. But I think something that you just mentioned is that God's relationship with each one of us will have requirements that match with where we're at. So even though I would argue that I'm not going to sit here and automatically blast a musician because they have a secular event, if you were to ask me, Pastor Ruthy, would you do a secular event? The answer would be no, because that's the work that God has called me to do. I'm not called to play secularly.
Yeah.
But I'm not called either to sit there and fire and brimstone someone who does, especially unless they're playing for someone where, they're twerking the entire time, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, and they're like half dressed. That's a whole different conversation. Pero yo estoy particularmente hablando I'm speaking of what God has called me to do.
Yeah.
And then also more than telling you, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, how can I teach you to hear God in the overall equation, if that makes sense? Don't do this event on Tuesday. Don't do that event on Thursday. Do this event on Friday. How about I say this? Let me teach you how to pray, how to develop your prayer closet, so that when you're looking at all the opportunities as a whole, whether it's music, whether it's relationships, whether who to marry, who to talk to, who to enter into business ventures with, what church to attend, what church to, whatever the case may be, that I could hear the voice of the Holy Ghost tell me this door or not this door. I think as mentors, we're charged not just with teaching people dogmatic rules, but a lifestyle.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, I'm soaking in literally everything that you're saying, and I know that our listeners as well will be super blessed by this conversation. So we just want to say thank you, for your transparency. Thank you for, being open, right? And diving into these conversations. And again, I know that there's so many different layers to these, topics and these discussions. And we always say on this podcast, and even to our listeners, we encourage them to take all of this and now you continue the conversation within your churches, within your youth groups, within your, musicians and worship teams, definitely continue the conversation. And if you can just give us where our listeners can find you on social media, if there's anything you'd like to share, if something you have up and coming, anything like that, this is your opportunity.
Well, thanks again, guys, for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And this really was a fun convo. In terms of finding me, I'm on Instagram, Ruthy Rodz, RUTHYRODZ. And I think that's it. You can find me on social media, and always send me messages if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that I could be a blessing with. But guys, thank you. This was so much fun.
No, thank you. And definitely go and follow her and be in tune to everything that she's doing and blessed by, what God is doing in her life. And we also want to take this opportunity. If you are not following our social media, be sure to do so. You can follow us on Instagram and at Facebook at God Life Culture Podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when we drop new episodes. We have special guests coming up in these next few weeks that we do not want you guys to miss out on.
So once again, Ruthy, thank you so much for being part of today's episode. I, for myself, am walking away edified, feeling great, with great perspective, and even things to, sit back and, like I said before, let it marinate and chew on it and see in what areas, I need to correct certain things so that I myself am giving that 100, and that excellence to the Lord. So thank you once again for tuning in to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. That's
God Life Culture.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.